Oh, dear. What day of Advent is it? We have no calendar. We don't know? Why? Hi, how's it going? It's Alexander. Today, I'm going to teach you some basic quilting skills. That's right, I'm going to teach you how to do some free motion quilting on a small quilted panel. I hope that this little video helps you join the quilting circle. Quilting brotherhood? Quilting cult. In this case, a Christmas panel. This panel happens to be an advent calendar. These sort of advent panels can be purchased at many sewing locations. It's a great way to introduce yourself to quilting. This particular advent panel I found in my stash behind me, and I remember buying this in London maybe 3 years ago at the mothership, Peter Jones. The panel looked cute. This is why I bought it. This particular panel is from the Craft Cotton Co. As I mentioned, this is an advent calendar. Now, you do not have to do an advent calendar as your first quilting project. I just happen to have that around the house, and I'm going to show you how I do some of the quilting techniques I have. For this project, you will certainly need some sort of panel that you're going to be quilting, fabric for the back, batting. Those two pieces could be scraps from your scrap bin. You're also going to need thread, either contrasting or matching, depends on the look you're going for. You'll also need a machine where you can lower the feed dogs or cover them, and I'll show you both types of machines later in the video. You will also need safety pins or quilting pins. You will also need bias binding. I'm going to show you in this video how I create my own bias binding, but you can also buy pre-made double fold bias binding. We also will need some interfacing, which is optional, depends on the quilt panel you have, and a dowel. So, let's get into quilting this panel. Here we go with the panel out of its packaging. As you can see, the normal creases and whatnot. This panel has the numbers up top, and then the little pocket squares below, which we'll be cutting out. There are also some instructions along the bottom. Girl, we won't need those. So, what are we going to do? We're going to cut those off and save them for later. Now, we need to cut the batting roughly the same size as the main quilted panel, actually slightly bigger. We will also need to cut the batting, again, slightly larger than the main front panel. With the back panel right side face down, batting on top, smoothed out, and then the main panel on top. Now we just have to pin this all together, making sure to get through all 3 layers. It should look like this once you're finished. I'm going to show you how to lower the feed dogs on both of my machines. On my more domestic machine, you pop off the utility tray, turn it around, and you find the button on the back, and slide across to lower the feed dogs. On my more professional machine, you cover the feed dogs with a metal panel, keeping them out of the way for sewing. Check with your sewing machine's manual to see how you lower the feed dogs on your machine. For free motion quilting, you will need to switch to a darning foot. Here are the 2 darning foots I have. Your machine might have slightly different, but this is what they look like. As you can see, my darning foot is on, and we're going to go slowly, swirling back and forth in a gentle meander, just like a big river. Slowly going around, making sure not to hit any of the pins. Once you've finished going down one way, you're going to flip the quilt around and then go back the other way. This is so you don't skew the fabric when quilting. You can do the free motion quilting as tight or as loose as you like. I prefer a tighter quilt, but for this purposes, I did a looser variation. If you are the queen bee of sewing, I am not, you can use quilting gloves. I do not have them. You want to gently guide the fabric through the machine. Never push, never pull, gently guide. Now it's time to cut off the excess batting and backing fabric. Luckily on this panel, I have a border that I can square up to. As you can see here, I'm using the bottom and squaring along. You will need to do this on whatever panel you are making. This will keep everything nice and neat. I chose to interface the back of the pockets here. As you can see, then cutting them out after interfacing. Once that was finished, this is what I had, a whole bunch of numbers. Once we had everything all cut out and ready to go, it was time to prepare the pockets. What we need to do is fold over the top edge, and we need a top stitch along that top edge, creating a nice, neat edge for the candy pockets. Once top stitched, this is what we have. Now it's just a matter of folding in the other edges, pinning in place, and then finding the corresponding number on the main fabric panel. Once the number had been found on the main fabric panel, it's time to get some more pins out and pin that down. Pin it down good. Once we have that pinned, it was time to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch around the remaining 3 sides, basically adhering it then to the main panel. And here we are, one pocket on. Look, it holds things. Now just to repeat for the other 24 pockets. Making the dowel tabs is not that difficult. Really, you're just making some strips, sewing those in half, and then turning right side in and pressing. Now this also depends on what size dowel you have. Please make sure whatever tabs you make, that they will fit around the dowel you have. Once you have the dowel tabs made, it's time to pin on to the top of the panel. Here, I chose to pin about 1.5 inches, 2 inches actually, in from each side. Some people love making bias binding. I am not one of them. The first thing I do is take some of the corresponding back panel fabric and cut an 18-inch by 18-inch square out and iron. Next, I'm going to fold that 18-inch square in half and then cut vertically, creating 2 mountains, one happy mountain, one sad mountain. Then, putting those 2 mountains together, sewing across that line there, with, of course, a 1/4-inch dog ear on either end. Once sewn and pressed, this is what I had. Now, it's time to fold these again. Fold the points into toward each other, and then cut. I'm doing 2.5-inch strips. Then, sewing those 2.5 strips together, we end up with a long piece of bias binding that is nice, stretchy, and matches the back panel. Now, it's time to add the bias binding to our advent calendar, or quilted panel. What we need to do first is take our bias binding, find one end, and fold that one end in about 1/4 inch and stitch along there. Once that is done, we have a nice clean edge for finishing the bias binding later. Now, what we need to do is fold the bias binding in half, wrong sides together, and then pin all the way along. This can be time consuming, so please take your time. Also, sometimes you stab your fingers with pins. I do that quite frequently. Once the bias binding is all pinned, wrong sides together, this is what you have. And now we can start adding it to the actual panel. I personally always add binding to the back and then wrap it around to the front. That will be shown later, but some people do it differently. I am doing it this way. So here's what we need to do first. Find the good end we just finished doing a top stitch on and start pinning from there. Using the pins we already have in the bias binding, making sure to leave a good flap. You keep pinning all the way along until you get to a corner. Now, a corner can be tricky, but let me show you how I do it. Laying it flat, I'm going to fold it back over itself in a 45-degree angle, and then push it down, finger press it if you like, and then continue the other direction, just like as shown. Sorry, my hair got in the way and the camera started focusing on that. Now we have a nice square, repeat, square corner, and then continue pinning the exact same way all the way around. Once you have gotten all that pinned, you're left with this. As you can see, everything is nice and neat. Now we have to deal with the ends, the two weird tabs. The way I do it is cut the extra piece off from the unfinished end and then tuck it in to the nice finished side, and you're going to see a close-up of how it's finished. See? There. All tucked in and all nice and neat. So when you sew, you won't even know that there was a join there. Now it's time to sew the bias binding down. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could use slightly more. I just happen to use 1/4 inch. And I'm just going to go all the way around, stopping about a 1/4 inch away from the corner. And I'll show you why right now. We want to be able to fold that corner over. So I removed about a 1/4 inch, fold that flap back over the other direction, twist, and then continue on. You're going to do this for every corner, stopping about 1/2 inch away, twisting or folding that little flap over, twisting, and continuing on. Once the bias binding is sewn on, this is what you're left with. Notice how it sort of looks a little flappy. Now you're going to push it towards the front as shown. Twist and pull, push and pull, and you're going to pin that down. Again, making sure that it's taut along the back, wrapping it around the front, and pinning. You want to make sure that you're covering your original stitches. Now in the corner, that's where you want a nice mitered edge. And I think I might do a close-up of that. So as you can see, we've pinned and folded and brought over to the front, and look, straight across at a 45-degree angle there in the corner, and you're going to fold in gently, if you need to fuss with it, fold in gently, pin in place, and then you have a nice 45-degree mitered corner, and then continue down. Now, top stitch to the front. Easy! Now that we have the lovely binding all sewn on there, just get a little close up there, all the way around, nice mitered corners, it's time to add the dowels. As you can see, I have the dowel tabs there, and I stitched them down. You don't have to, you could hand stitch if you want, but since the front fabric was white and it was white string, you wouldn't see it anyway. Now I just need to measure out how long the dowel I need, mark it, and go and cut it. Once cut, it's time to see where we're going to put some holes to add the hardware. I'm going to do it in about 1 inch in from each side. The hardware I'm using is just picture frame hardware. You can find that at many local hardware stores, grocery stores, anything of that. What you need to do is start the hole, twisting in. It can be hard. Once you've done that to both holes, put the dowel through and fully twist the hardware all the way through. And this is what you're going to end up with. So, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and leave any comments below. I would like to hear them. Bye now. Have a good day.